Thank you. And thank you for attending this morning. So a couple quick questions. Anybody here hear me speak before? Couple? Good. Anybody here out of curiosity? Oh, good. Then I don't need to work. And last thing, did anybody go to download this presentation? Okay. So I'm going to, if you did, it's got 2 slides to it. I actually build my deck up until the last, there's a couple blanks or guidelines. It's not the full. What? I'm sorry. Oh, okay. So I want to apologize. I don't upload my deck because as of 5 o'clock this morning, I was still putting finishing touches on it. So let's talk about gold diggers. So I'm sure, right? Quick one, who was thinking gold diggers, right? Actually from the mining hills of South Dakota is we're really going to be looking at the gold and true gold digging. So you may ask yourself, right? Business continuity. I'm not seeing any gold. Where is it? Well, the ironic thing is data is the new gold. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some theory, and then we'll actually go in and give some great examples of it. So as we go through, please feel free to ask questions. The nice thing is you're sitting on a lot of it and you just don't realize it. So what are we talking about? Big data. And what is big data? Right? So it's when you look at our jobs, BCDR professionals, we are getting data from all over the organization, and we're aggregating it for a purpose of business continuity, disaster recovery, compliance, and resilience. Ooh, that was pretty good. And what you're able to do, and big data is the big business now, and there's a lot of software out there to do that, but we can do that with what we've got. And one of our primary tools in doing data analysis is Excel. So you can see the Wiki's definition, and mine is I'm locking up Excel. And yes, it does lock. So when we look a little deeper, just because we have it doesn't mean it's any good. Right? When we look at everything we got, does not mean it's gold. Where the gold really lies is in interpretation. It's taking and applying the knowledge that we have or things that we see and doing interpretation. And that's where we call it data mining, big data, and you can actually shine through. So let's take a look at those nuggets that we're going to be able to find. So I'll talk a little bit about the process, and then I'm really just going to give you guys some examples, and we'll talk through those examples of real life, different industries using data they've got in their tools in front of them and working with other departments on where that gold came from. So when you look at it, what data do we have at our fingertips, right? I've got feeds from HR, so I got all my employees, job titles, all of that information. I've got risks, facilities risks, some vendor risks, all of that information from crisis, right? So if we're doing crisis management, we need to know those risks and mitigate them. So I've got history on that as well. I know my buildings. Hey, we're all about business process, so I've got all that. So each one of these things in there, and there's more. I just didn't want to clutter up the slide. We take it in, and we put it into our funnel. And this is our funnel, right? It's that BIA, it's the interdependencies and the requirements and the subdependencies. For some organizations, it may be regulations. And then I'm looking at the RTO from the business side and recovery time capabilities from my vendor service level agreements and IT. And what am I using to do that? Right? I'm using Excel. If I have a software tool, I'm using that. It's a lot easier. If I'm using dashboards, and I'll give you an example of that as well. And then there's not only research on the web, but the industry statistics, and there's software. Anybody hear of SAS? That's a whole predictive data analysis model. And some organizations have it. It's a great partnership, by the way. They'll love you for it. And And down the bottom is organizational knowledge. And I'll touch on this. So how many of you here are planners? DR? So if you take a look, and this was said to me by a couple of my clients, is we know the organization better than our CEO. We know every business process, we know the impacts, we know the interdependencies. You guys have a lot of knowledge just here, just in the work you're doing. Nobody else has that. So let's use that for more gold. Right? So we're going to look for correlations and patterns. That's the whole point behind data mining and data modeling, to support some decisions. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So this is one of those, you gotta have a good infographic, right? Look at just some of the data that we have at our fingertips. Right? We want to turn that into value. One of the hard things to do, and especially if you're going to present this to senior leadership, is putting it into a palatable form that they can understand. If there's any leaders here, I apologize in advance. You put it in pretty pictures and dashboards and graphs. So whether it's Excel, a pivot table, or if it's within your tool, having that ability to take it, identify it, and put it into a 30-second elevator pitch is going to be priceless. And again, that's when utilizing, if you have a data analytics team, is going to be priceless. So, let's talk about that Midas touch. I'm going to give you a couple stories and examples of where we have seen data mining and BC turning information into gold. So I'm going to talk about zombie apps. Shadow IT. We'll take a look at the employee life cycle. And then, what? Life cycle? BCDR? Come on, really? It's a little early, right? We'll also look at duplication of processes for whatever reason. Right? So this is for the BC people, IT efficiencies. And then major account mishaps, what if scenarios, using or extending your data window out a little bit. So, zombie applications. Right? These are those applications that if IT supports them, the business no longer needs. IT just doesn't know it, and they're still running. So, shadow IT. You guys are familiar, hear that term before? Hopefully. On the IT side, of course, we deal with it every day. It's whether we have those rogue departments going and buying software or setting up web services. That never happens, right? Exactly. And we have the ability to discover those within our processes and tools. So let's talk about zombies. So I'm out of Philadelphia. We have a large chemical company, and we were actually engaged in an application criticality analysis. Anybody not know what that is? Anybody know what that is? All right, I'll take the benefit of the doubt. So an ACA, or application criticality analysis, imagine it's a BIA light. All we're focusing is on our applications. So, great. Client gives us an inventory, which I'm going to challenge that in a bit. So we go through and we do an application criticality analysis. And the way we do it is not only an RTO, but we use an algorithm in the BIA that assigns points to basically the frequency of how often a department picks an application. So often in finance, and I use SAP, I'm going to get an RTO automatically. But then I'm going to get, so if I have 5 processes, I'm going to do an algorithm based on their criticality and add those numbers up. So I get a point. So I take that for finance, and now I take it across the entire chemical company. I'm going to get a high number for the most critical, most used app. Make sense? Great. What do we find? 2 applications that had 0 points. So we go back. No, that can't be. So, all right, we go do a little discovery. There's an AS400 sitting in the back in a data center in its own corner, and it's actually a pretty big corner. It's running something called Optimum HRIS. Well, about 4 years ago, they moved to PeopleSoft. But, and if there's any HR people here, I apologize in advance. HR says, we need that data. We're not going to retire that server because there's some old data on there. So we did a hard cost analysis on that. $1.1 million the first year. Those are hard costs. We're not talking IT support costs, cooling, heating, power. It hadn't, and the reason we know it required 4 years ago, that was the last time that the system was accessed with a logon. So how do we get this? This is BC, right? Is getting that data and doing a little bit of more analysis, taking that extra step and finding it. That we could have just given that report. But again, when I'm looking at that data, right, I'm doing that interpretation and I'm going, this doesn't make any sense. Where is it? I go back. By the way, IT moved it to a SQL database and gave them access if they needed it. Because it was too old to even have any value to import into PeopleSoft. So that's a big example of a zombie app. We took it, I like this one because, icebergs, the bigger parts underneath. So we have a manufacturing company we were dealing with, and did a BIA, a full BIA. And sometimes, the customers will say, here's our application list. We don't like working with that application list. If I get it, and this is it, if I get it organically, if the departments are using it from a pick list that's wrote, right? Check, check, check. But if I say, for finance account payable, okay, what's the first step and what applications do you use to do each step? I'm going to get those shadow IT, those rogue apps. I'm going to get a lot more discovered in really no time at all. So they had 133. So we did the interviews saying, okay, on the whiteboard, what are your steps? What are your processes? What are your resources, support components? And we got it that way, organically. Finished the data, we give them, they wanted the BIA. But again, going a little further. There was 11 shadow IT apps. Rogue. So in looking at those, did a little bit more discovery and said, wait a minute. We can move 9 of those to an enterprise license agreement. How often in large organizations you have that and they're buying separate licenses where you can go back to that software provider and get a license for all of them at a drastically reduced cost. Oh, sorry. So that saved $225,000 in licensing costs from business continuity. When's the last time anybody here saved any money? We're usually viewed as an expense, a cost center, a checklist. The whole process here is to get into that thinking of what can I use to get to show value, to work outside of my comfort zone. Any questions so far on this? Okay. Certainly, Vicki.
So when you did your ACA and you're looking at how many business processes use a certain application, do you have a way to capture that?
Yes.
That's always the struggle.
So, all right. So we actually, my company has a software product. And so in there, it actually does that. It automatically calculates RTO and does that aggregate point ratings.
Oh, okay.
Transparent.
So you have a tool that does that.
Yeah, so I have a tool. Can you do it with Excel? Have I given you that concept? The answer is you probably can. It's not hard to do, but if you have an Excel guru to say, I want to do an algorithm, if critical, 5, if necessary, 3, if optional, 1, and for every function, add them up. I just gave away the secret sauce. It's a good question. Did I answer that?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
So what's your tool interface with?
HR, CMDBs. Oh, it's going to be the planner. You can do it through a CMDB feed as well, but I like the human side of it because usually the data coming in isn't always perfectly clean. HR, everybody's favorite subject, right? You can see everybody on the edge of their seats. So when we look at life cycle, right, where does it start? It starts with the hiring process, all the way through to retirement. So you're saying, all right, Chris, I'm getting a little bit out of this, but this one is just too far off. So where is it? So let's start at the onboarding process. So, let's start with the onboarding process, Chris. Anybody here do onboarding in their company? So there's a HR resource, and obviously I have to cite my source here. But if you can see, is those that have one, 22% don't have a formal onboarding process. Has anybody here onboarded another employee? It's painful because it slows my productivity way down in doing that. So usually that's why such a large portion is somewhat successful. So I did a little bit more digging for gold. It takes 8 months to get an employee up to speed in a department. That's a lot. Think about the cost. Again, direct and indirect costs, not their salary, but yours. I've lost 20 to 40% of my productivity in managing and helping and getting this person up to speed. That's going to cost this company a lot of soft money. All right, so ready? How do we fix that? So all aboard with onboarding. So that data that we collect can be used to help. How so? Think about it. Onboarding. What do I need to know? I need to know what we do, right? Who do we interact with? What's our interrelationships, those interdependencies, if you're doing the ISO 22317 BIA, downstream and upstreams. Now I know who we're interacting with, right? I know, if you're following FFIEC, what our normal operation steps are, preferably if you've done lizard brain at a high level, more of a guide. And also, what do I need? What applications? Are there vendors that I need? Are there other people? Any specialized equipment? I need a mica printer. Oh. So if I'm documenting normal procedures anyway, let's go talk. Giant healthcare organization. Right? Big turnover. And you think about what it is and through acquisitions and growth, there's a lot of turnover in healthcare. So we were working and said, why don't we try this? Right? So it was a pilot. And said, what if we gave you a report or a worksheet so that when a new employee comes on and that manager, we're working off that same worksheet? And they said, yeah, let's give it a shot. So they actually took that, reformatted the reports, right? Because you really don't need a BIA. I just need my processes, steps, any supplemental documentation that I need, and you know what? Maybe some of that recovery as well, because it'll give a little bit better understanding. So they took the data out of the system and gave it to HR. HR formatted it. And this is after, it's no longer a pilot. It's now in full operation. So they said it took between 6 and 9 months. Feedback was it shortened it by a third. There's a dollar value there. Managers loved it because it was almost like a checklist for them. Yes, I've now shown you how we do accounts receivable. You've been through that process. You know who we're working with and know what to expect. So it became a structured guide. And again, that's the guide. The employees keep it. It's printed so that it has notes for each page and each process.
Do you know if they went back to to the next layer was once somebody came and they saw mistakes in that, to give feedback back to update the BIA.
Absolutely. Whoops. Departments are now owning that plan even more because it has value on a daily basis. They're using it not only for fixing their onboarding, but they're giving it back to the BC person or going into their plans, right? I've got a better business continuity plan because I see value outside of that resiliency and compliance piece. The challenge, by the way, is now they're looking at and putting the 27 steps to log into their account management system. So it's a balance, right? That doesn't make for a good plan, and it actually doesn't make for a good onboarding process. But yeah, that was the exciting piece. That was the aha moment. So what's that cost? Right now I'm working with HR. HR's coming to me and asking for help. The departments are now owning those plans and making them not only resilient, but truly viable. And one of the other things that this side is the same process goes for IT and from the recovery side. And very often in some organizations, you'll see a siloed IT where somebody's been there for 15 or 20 years and is the sole subject matter expert. It's the hit by the bus guy, right? By having them document that process and using that, it's not so much for the onboarding, but it's protecting that institutional knowledge. Questions on this? This was real exciting to see the interactions and the respect that, it's not, here comes Chris again. Well, that happens anyway. To see that, hey, can you help me out? Really adds value.
I also wondered, you're documenting normal operations, but in business continuity, you're really looking at not having normal operations. So how was that feedback to really document?
Excellent question, Vicki. Right, so now that I'm doing my normal processes, I now am going back, and that's been back on the BC, so I was remiss in doing it, and they're now using that to refine the recovery process. Or if it's tasked to the department through a workflow, they're now saying, well, if I change this, this changes. So what's nice is, instead of sending out reminders, the departments are coming back to us to do that. So anybody recognize, I'm sorry, yes?
Is there any politically kind of some organization, within the organization, or you are digging underneath the dirt and it shows up due to embarrassment and all the political...
Oh, okay, so is there any negative repercussions? So I've got 5 clients, one that we've done this with is full, and 4 others that are adopting it. And it's been more positively than negatively received. It's been, that it's first, sometimes you have to have a relationship with HR.
Right. It could be because they listen to the outsiders. Outsider is exploring that's different, then insider is exploring all those.
Getting into your area.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kind of
yes.
very defensive.
Yeah.
But if you're right, there can be defensive, and that's cultural. But if I'm saying, hey, I have an idea that might help, would you like to try it? So pilot takes that risk away, and if it doesn't, okay. But again, that's a cultural thing.
Yeah, I'm calling it pilot is probably a big win.
Yes.
They don't feel like it.
Does anybody recognize these logos? Yeah, right? The room got real cold all of a sudden. Those 2 by themselves make it chilly. This freezes you to the bone. So I had a customer call me up and say, geez, someday I'll get this right. They got an MRA. For those of you not in the financial marketplace, there's written warnings, MRAs, matters requiring immediate attention, and after that, we don't want to work there. It's basically the feds coming in. Is that about right? All right, so they got an MRA. And that MRA said, that's the quote. And we're talking, what, 70 billion in assets for this organization? Problem is, people don't leave. I've been in the job for 24 years doing the same thing in banking. By the way, this isn't just a banking issue, as we're well aware, but there it is. And now, so I had the conversation. I go, well, there's no BC requirement here. So we were sitting there and go, well, wait a minute. What if, or what data do we have that can help? Back to HR, right? So we're going to give HR a report. Well, I already know the departments. I know the function, and I've captured the job title or position that's doing the role, not the person. So if I take that to that same math and algorithm that I've done in my BIA, I'm going to get an RTO and a point rating. Or even still, if I don't do the point rating, I'm going to get a criticality, right? I'm going to get an RTO on the person. Now, we're in dangerous political waters now because of age discrimination. So at this point, I'm going to throw it over the fence to HR and say, hey, here's this information that I can give you so that when you go back to the OCC, we have a plan. We are working off of our BIA data, they love that, to identify. So they match it to HRIS. Oh, right, what did we just do before? That plan that's already done with HR and onboarding, they're now using that for cross-training and doing that mitigation to address that. So again, wait a minute. We're business continuity folks. That's not my problem. And this was actually it was a different bank or a different financial organization. So again, it's looking at data. Remember that one slide, it's interpretation. What do I have that can help? So you're basically, right, I'm passing the torch. This is that offboarding or crossing off of it. Next case study. It's the case of double vision. So we have an organization that I don't know what they do. They started doing fuel processing into credit card, to travel, to healthcare, they're just all over it. And they're growing like crazy. And we were doing it with her. We were doing a review of the data, right? Looking at again, we're starting to do some data mining. Outside of BC, let's look at what we've got. So across through their acquisitions and growth, I've got different functions or different departments and different names doing the same thing. Because they're growing so fast. I got, somebody comes over, they start taking something, and it turned out they have, let's say, for their major accounts department, they were spin-offs that had occurred organically to service accounts. So then they had sub-departments, because when they moved out of the departments and started growing, so they had departments doing the exact same thing in the exact same processes with different names. And then as they grew and took over companies that were like, 5 years later, they're still doing the same thing. So we're looking, now this was a data analytics model. This did not fit into Excel. So what were we able to accomplish? Because this was a team effort. This took a little over a year. Department naming across the entire organization. That, when you think about just doing that, now this is BC, that's an HR issue. That's a leadership decision. So that I know customer service, I know accounting, I know finance. It doesn't matter the segment. It reports up. I have another customer they use, who's sitting in this room. He has a brick campaign. So through that acquisitions, they're doing it ahead of time. They're finding that software. and doing that consolidation as they do that, which is a really neat way to do it. So they named it. Consolidation of processes, you're doing the same thing. It's using different tools. Let's aggregate those tools. Good news, they didn't do any layoffs. What did they do? They grew their customer service division and reallocated those resources. So they now have a dedicated call center in North Carolina that was doing multiple things. It made better sense to do those type of things. What's that cost? From an internal perspective, I'm using everything that we have. What's the cost to the business? Think about that. I've got 42 people in 3 locations doing the exact same thing. So that's members, that's a director, that reports up to a vice president. That's big dollars. Big.
It would also be, even if you didn't do the consolidation or anything, it's also an awareness when you have failover capabilities. So now you know, you may not have known before that Mary does the same job as John in different regions, and now you know, and you have that failover capability.
I didn't even look at it that way, right? So you're right. You have that. So not as a duplicity of process, but you hopefully have similarities in recovery. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm going to go back and tell her that. I'm going to take credit for that, by the way.
Oh.
Questions so far? Right. So, middleware. I am now getting technical. So, for those of you not in IT, you can fall asleep. For those of you in IT, forgive my simplicity of definitions. So, what's middleware? Basically, it's software that acts as an intermediary, as a transport, right? So between disparate systems. Very heavily used, especially in large enterprises. You'll have many different middleware that'll pull from different systems. Healthcare is probably one of the largest, followed by manufacturing. So, you may not be able to see here, this is where we're using Access as middleware. Is anybody cringing? I see a couple faces that are pained, right? First rule, Access is not middleware. Anybody want to disagree on that one? I'm okay. It was never designed as that, right? It was designed as baby SQL. I can allow multiple users into a record in a department. So, sure enough, let's peel back that onion. You know what happens when you peel back an onion, right? Exactly. So I got a credit card company. Way back, I think it was actually before 2007, but the institutional knowledge only went back that far. They were using an Access in a couple different departments as the front end and get to the back end data. I went to PeopleSoft in 2010. Now you think the departments would have gone to that front end and retired the Access. We already know the answer, right? Not happening. Still working as the front end and the middleware. Now you're talking a credit card processing company. Do you know what their RTO is? Immediate. It's a global credit card processing company. It's immediate. We are talking, we actually did a downtime cost analysis. I forget what it was, but it was millions of dollars in 1 hour. And then, because you have to basically validate and get that data back into the system, it took almost 27 hours to get caught up. But we're using Access. It's okay. And how scary is that? There's a little bit more data mining, right? We got in, we looked at it, we went to finance and broke it down by department. We didn't ask the department. Because of course the department would greatly underestimate how much they actually bring in, right? So, right, it showed 0 to 4 hours, which for our cases is immediate, because it goes to the time frame beforehand. And then we went, wait a minute, let's look at some other data. Let's go talk to IT. Let's see where it's linked, right? Because this is in isolation. Let's see where that middleware is actually touching other systems. So the Access went from basically standalone to the fourth highest application in the organization. And if you really look at it, if you stand back, it goes to the top because it had 7 different systems touching it. I love this one, right? Business continuity. In some cases, the DR team is separate. We sat down with them and the CIO and made that case to retire it as the front end and as middleware. So because IT needed to do that and migrate that data and get the front end in for PeopleSoft. What's the downtime going to cost if that went down? Right? 27 hours of labor on the IT side. Forget the lost revenue. Because what happens is in that credit card processing, and this is, I've learned a lot, is it goes through a fraud check, right? So that's when you swipe your card at the pump, and you got to put your zip code in. That's their authentication. But you'll see credit card frauds do on your, if you've ever been a victim of it, thank you, Experian, you'll get a small charge on your card. And that's them testing the card to see if it's valid. So they'll do $1, $10, and then they're at Best Buy for the rest of it. But, so there's a whole fraud piece as well. So it's not direct revenue, it's exponentially greater. For those of you, anybody fly here? Okay. So, here's a scenario. We're going to lose a major customer. So I've got an airline manufacturer. Again, you learn a lot, right? Remember I said you guys know more in an organization when you go through the BIA and recovery process than anybody else. From an operational standpoint, think of the operational efficiency. So here's a little one I'll leave you with. It's outside of the box. They have 15 major accounts. They make 2 planes. Yes, from 2 different manufacturers. For those 15 accounts, you can have, just on one plane, over 1,000 variations. Now, all they're building is basically the shell, the wings, attach the engines, and they send them out for final finishing. There's 1,000 variations in just one line. I want an Airbus 3300 done this way with this and this, but I also want them here and here, depending on what they're designed for. Really complex. So I said, what if we identified not only the customer, but the plane as part of the BIA? So when we're on the manufacturing floor is, what are you working on? What line, because the line may be, empennage, engines, nacelles. It doesn't matter. What are you doing it for? It takes no time extra. Again, we're looking at it as a resource. Doesn't really take it. Why? Well, what happens if Boeing goes on strike in Seattle, Washington? Oh, it happened. Normally they would lay the Boeing line off. Right? That's just been that way for years. 50 years. They lay that line off. But now what we're able to do is a what-if scenario. Let's lose Boeing, these airlines, these planes that we're building, as a loss, as a disaster, right? We're really going outside of the norm here. Is I'm doing a lost customer as a disaster or a plan or exercise. I can reallocate them. Right now we're working on the Airbus. I can take these people and move them over here so we can get ahead of production, which never happens. To do that, it requires some cross-training. We already know how to do that, right? But they were able to do a drastic layoff. That stopped. That culture is shifting from laying the people off to where can I reallocate them because I know what lines have been impacted. Before they couldn't do that. The line managers had to go back and report up and then identify. You know how hard that was? It's easier just to lay them off. Huge increase in morale. Right? It is a culture shift. And where did it come from? It came from us. It came from business continuity. by a little thinking outside of the box of saying, we do what if scenarios. What if there's a distributed denial of attack? What if there's a hurricane? Why don't we make it a little bit more personal? What if I lost these customers? So recommendation, if you do this and it works, capture it. Just ask, right? Who are your major accounts that you're working with? I have a financial institution that actually captures what regulators they deal with. So when there's an audit, I know who to bring in for that audit automatically. Right? That is bottom line goal. Look at the reduction across the organization from a cost perspective, and not only an outlay, but I got that Airbus out to Air France 2 weeks early. There's usually performance bonuses if they get them done early. There's contractual penalties if they don't.
There's the other side of it is you're now identifying a big risk, so your risk management people can leverage the information, understanding, you've got 15 accounts, and if you lose them, what's the impact of that? So your risk management people.
Beautiful. Yes, and that was the initial point of that. I go, well, you guys only have 15 accounts. But see, the problem is, in the airline industry, there's only so many airlines. That's the problem is doing that. But they're actually now looking at what revenue is by what customer as well. That was where we started with it. That was really what I thought the focus was. But as you're working with them, and again, you get to know those lines, and it is amazing to see. It's the largest enclosed building in the world. Huge. You need golf carts to get back and forth, and there are charging stations along the way. So, where are we for next steps? Where do we go, right? This is some good stories to get you thinking, right? That's the whole goal here, is to challenge what we do, right? What am I getting from my data? What are my sources of record? My CMDB, my HR, my facilities, maybe risks, compliance. What do I have available to me? Because if you don't know what you have, you're not going to know where to look. But just alone in your BCDR program is high, high value. So how do you keep it successful? Who do I want to approach? Is it HR? Is it finance? Start that relationship. Get somebody, to your point earlier, on your side. Let them take lead, right? It's okay. It's a common goal. Dig deeper. You brought up that point, 15 major accounts. I'm looking at it from a risk standpoint, finance to the organization, and as we dug a little deeper, we're like, wait a minute. If we now disperse that information down at the plant level and the manufacturing line, we can now do this. That was a great example of just doing that, digging deeper and deeper. And where's the value? Why do it? You get to see operational inefficiencies. Right? Usually we just put them in the plants. It's challenging what we do to find that true value to the organization outside of BC. Sometimes it comes around as it does with HR. Right? We're really good listeners. That's probably our number one job skill is we're listening to the departments. We're listening to our stakeholders and customers. Just listen for other things. Listen for what they're not saying. So, I'll leave you with some final thoughts. Oh. Right? You've got it. Now you know how to do data mining. It can reduce risks. Whether it be vendor, compliance, financial, or soft costs. And at the same time, we're increasing visibility. I have our planners that are now presenting at a board level on a regular basis because of what they've been bringing forth. Because now it actually gets to that level. Think about what you've seen here. That gets to the board level. And who's the subject matter expert? the gold diggers. So go discover yours. Find out where your gold is. Let me know. I would love to know. So my email address is there. If you'd like this presentation, just shoot me an email. I am not in sales, so I don't send stuff. So, questions? No? Well, thank you.